Hi everyone, I am Jeff Lords and I'm going to look at a game from round 5 of the Lausanne Women's Grand Prix taking place in Switzerland this week. And going into the 5th round, the two opponents were separated by half a point, with Dzagnidze trailing on 2, and Nana Muzychuk was half a point behind the co-leaders, Kina and Harika. So the game began with Muzychuk was white. She opened e4, c5, knight c3, knight c6, knight f3, sort of heading back towards an open Sicilian. Black played e5, which prevents the open line. Bishop c4, d6, d3, and bishop to e7. Castles for white. h6, which is an unusual move order, but it seems to be perfectly fine. Knight e1, so ready for f4, knight f6, f4, opening the f line, takes, bishop takes, castles for black, and now knight f3. So we have the sort of transposition now after the unusual h6. We're back into the main line where black plays bishop here usually, but Nana played knight a5, bishop to d5, which is a strong reply by Nana Muzychuk. The idea is that she's not afraid to lose the bishop for knight because, well, Dzagnidze did capture it. So we get this position in the game, and now the knight is on a strong outpost here. So if black, she played knight c6, bringing the knight back into play. But if black tries to develop another piece, so say here this runs into straight away, it loses a pawn to takes queen e1, hitting the knight, the loose knight, and when the knight retreats, then queen g3 hits d6 and also h6, h6 due to the pin, so white would win either the h6 pawn or the d6 pawn. So that isn't possible for black to play here, to play bishop e6. Could try this move, but then which is a bit similar to the game, to try and block white's attack. But then after knight takes, g5, hg5, bishop d2 again pressures the knight. And if now knight c6, then queen h5 is powerful, hitting the pawn on g5. And if f6, then white can amazingly sort of crash through with rook f6. Black doesn't have enough time to bring defenders over. If white takes the rook this way, then check, king, queen h6, king g8, and now bringing over the last piece, rook f1. So f5 doesn't help matters here due to bishop g5, and then well, for example, if f5, you can play check here, bishop here, and then there's a threat of bishop f6. So for example, if you go here, then check, takes, and now knight takes, and that's similar to what we're going to look at in a moment, sort of this threat of queen h6 forces queen g7, but then queen h5 will mate with mate like that. So black couldn't do that. And after king there, rook f1, the best black can try something like knight e5, and that allows knight f6. We can't play king f7 because of the discovered check, picking off the rook, and the check down here. So rook f6 will be forced, rook takes, and now white's now threatening to take on g5 and then go to play queen g5 and then to lawnmower mate with rook h6. And if black plays, for example, queen e7 to bring the queen nearer to the king and try and go queen to g7, then rook d6. We don't have time for queen g7, among other things. white could take it and then play bishop c3, winning the knight with total winning ending. And if after rook d6, if black develops with bishop d7, bishop c3 this time threatens to take on e5 and then d7. If you protect that with moving it to e8, which covers more squares around the king, but then rook f6, and this time we're now threatening bishop e5 and rook f6, rook f8 mate rather. And after, for example, knight d7, queen g5, we can't go to the h file because of rook h6 mating. And after queen g7, rook f8, king takes, and then queen g7 is mate. So that maneuver with bishop g5 leads to great difficulties for black. Oh, sorry, I meant to complete that line with after here we'll just look at the other capture where black takes with the rook and f6 after knight c6, queen h5, f6, rook f6, and now if instead of gf6, which is what we just looked at, if bishop takes, now there's a threat of, well, either piece on f6 followed by queen check, and then taking on f6, for example, queen f8, bishop takes, pawn takes, check. Queen g7 we can't play because of knight f6 and queen e8 mating. And if king h8, then knight f6 threatens mate on h7. After queen g7, you can play queen h5 and then mate on h6. So the maneuver with bishop g5 doesn't work in this position. So Dzagnidze played the better move, knight c6, and now the strong reply by Muzychuk, queen e1, sort of ready to bring the queen to a very strong and beautiful square on g3. So now there's nothing better than to try bishop g5. If you play rook e8, hoping for knight e7, rook e7, queen g3, and now the rook can guard both the pawns quite nicely along the third rank. But the problem is that white should play this move instead, queen straight away to g3, and now we're threatening knight e7 followed by bishop d6, and also bishop h6, so black can't prevent both of those ideas. If king here to prevent one of them, then we can take on e7, bishop d6, hitting c5, b6, and now white's just a very healthy pawn up and also better development. So that wouldn't be possible for black. So she tried bishop g5 instead. This time the bishop took on g5 so that the queen could come to g3 with gain of tempo after hg5. And now this pawn is attacked twice. So either black protects it with f6 as in the game, or plays g4. G4 just allows the knight quick access to the f5 square. You can't really weaken your g6 square, would be white could immediately occupy that with a sort of winning attack. So in the game, Dzagnidze played f6 and now h4. So again, gh4 allows the knight in, and then either knight f5 or probably even stronger is knight g6. So g4 by Dzagnidze, knight h2, knight e5, now knight e3, threatening just to take the pawn. Now instead of defending, which is a sort of very passive and allows h5, sort of cementing the weakness on g7, and then white can just calmly build up. You can always go rook f4 later, and then g4 can be taken anyway, or white can just double the rooks and then play h6 and try and crash through on the f6 square. So it looked really at this point, as I was watching it live, like this is just a miserable defense for black. It's just going to be a pawn down, and it's a technical exercise for white. And it's perhaps that's what Nana Muzychuk was expecting, I don't know, but Dzagnidze played queen b6, which was pretty astonishing really, because after the reply b3 from Muzychuk, it was like we were sort of wondering what's the point. I mean, I know the queen's over. The queen is now sort of further away from the king's side where the theatre of action is, and white can sort of, if she's worried about c4 discoveries, can always play here first and then take on g4. But the point was that Dzagnidze now sort of revealed her idea with queen b4, which at the same time is as a sort of risky as well as sort of dangerous for white. It's very, very double-edged to bring your queen into the midst of the centre this way, but it's still it's a really interesting manoeuvre to sort of muddy the waters. So now Muzychuk played knight d5. So the first point was that if white captures this, then knight takes g4, knight takes g4, bishop takes g4, queen takes, and now sort of startling move f5. So we can't take this with the pawn because then the queen will be lost on g4. We also can't take with the rook because then there's queen d4 check and picks off the loose rook on a1. And so white would have to play something along the lines of this to keep e4 protected, and then black could play check, and then king h1, and then if nothing else, black could head into it and defend an ending a pawn down. Probably have reasonable drawing chances. I guess in maybe, I'm not sure whether it's better in the single rook ending or the double rook ending, but either way, black gets activity. Well, she doesn't even have to swap the queens, but this was the point behind if white captures immediately on g4. It's a very active way of defending for black instead of, if she'd gone queen d7 instead of queen b6. So Muzychuk understandably played a stronger line with knight d5, queen d4, king h1. And now bishop e6, not being afraid to give up the exchange, because after knight c7, perhaps something like this, knight takes, rook takes, and now say white plays here, then black could play king f7, followed by rook h8. Black would have reasonable compensation. It still should in the long term be winning for white, but it's not so easy, and the black queen and knight are very well centralized in the middle of the board here. So, and the knight itself is badly placed, and this pawn's a little bit weak as well. So black would get a very different game to one if she'd compared to one if she'd sort of sat there passively. But Muzychuk declined to play that, and she instead played the knight back to f4 with gain of tempo, and bishop d7, and now queen e1, herself retreating her queen. But the idea now is to sort of threaten c3, and again sort of trapping the black queen in the middle of the board. Well, black could sacrifice a piece, but that wouldn't be good either for black. So, excuse me, she played queen b2, queen to d2, and now f5, continuing the policy of activity at all costs, it seems. But this is a sort of a risky strategy, but it had gained her considerable time on the clock, and this is probably what saves her, I think, is the fact that Muzychuk was short of time. She probably consumed time trying to trap the opponent's queen. So now she played a very good move, rook b1. So we can't go back here because of c3, and then the queen is trapped, and black would have to give up a piece to save it. And queen a2 runs into rook hits the queen, queen b2, and then this time this f rook hits the queen, and then again the pawn hits the queen, which now forces black to give up a piece, but then it would be hopeless after giving up a piece. So instead of that, Dzagnidze played queen a3, knight h5, queen a2, and now queen g5. So black's queen is sort of so far removed from the king's defences that white has a really strong attack. G6 isn't possible because of knight f4, king here, and now at h5 blasts open the king. For example, takes, king, check on g5, king h7, and now queen h4 check. And now after king g7 we can take on f5, intending things like knight h5 check, or queen g5 again. And after bishop f5, knight h5, king g6, and then the knight comes back to g3, and now there's a threat of queen h5, which wins the house because f5 will drop. And if black tries rook h8 to prevent that, then queen e7, intending queen d6, and also intends queen d6, and also taking on f5. And after, say, rook e8, queen d6 check, rook e6, queen d5, fantastic centralized knight, and now there's no answer to taking here, and the rook would be on Prix, so that would lose at least a piece here. So g6 doesn't work. So rook f7 was played in the game, and now ef5, which, as it turns out, I mean, it's hard to be too critical because Anna was, very short of time. But this move unfortunately throws away all the advantages, it turns out. Rather incredibly, really, because the king still looks weak. But the better move is to play rook c1, and then, for example, after rook f8, ef5, and white then has sort of held the queen side together, and obviously we can't take on f5 because of takes. Means you can't capture because of mate on g7. So white just retains a massive attack here with f6 coming soon. For example, if queen b2, f6, g6, and now rook e1, sort of intending to capture on e5 and then crash through on g6. Like this, if queen c2, rook e5, de5, queen g6, king h8, looks a bit like black's getting away, unless you're a puzzle rush fan, then you know these straight away. Queen g7, check, rook takes, pawn takes, king h7, and now new queen, and white wins easily. So, but in the game ef5 was played, and then Dzagnidze found the strongest reply, which looks like you shouldn't be able to get away with this sort of audacious queen maneuver, but actually it seems to work here. The queen's coming back to the defense of the king's side at the same time, gaining pawns and sort of weakening white's hold on the center. So knight g4 was played, which the alternative was to play f6, but now bishop c6, and now there's a very strong threat to g2 from the queen and bishop, so there's a threat of mate in 1, and not easy for white to prevent. Well, you've got to go rook g1, but that runs into bishop takes, check, forcing rook g2, queen b1, rook g1, and now queen d3. It looks like white's got some semblance of an attack still, but it's not sufficient. For example, if knight g7, we can play knight f3, and now if queen g4, then knight takes g1. Now none of the discoveries work for white. If knight f5, then we can run to f8 with the king, and that's fine. I'll probably also go to h8 there, actually. And if instead knight e6, then we can play king h8, and then after king takes, simply rook here, and white's winning, black's winning. And if instead of that we take on f3 instead of taking with queen g4, then queen f3, we can't go king h2 because of mate on h3, and if rook g2, queen f6 finally squashes the attack. So f6, there isn't time to do that. In any event, black is sort of threatening this, and also d3 is falling, so it's good for black now. But after knight g4, queen g4, this ran into a very strong move, bishop f5. But maybe white still has a defense against this, but it's difficult to find short of time. If you tried the move rook f5 instead, and then after queen b1, king h2, we're now threatening rook f7 and taking on g7 with a strong attack, or at least strong counterplay. And if queen b2, protecting it, then we can now play queen c4 with a pin along here. There's still time for white to do something here because the queen is still far from the king's side, really. And after rook f8, white can put the queen on this strong square on g6, which hinders black from playing g6. And after, say, queen d4, hitting h4, white can play knight f4. Now, there's no easy way for black to drive the queen away, or to unpin. And for example, the best black can probably do is queen f2, but now knight g6 is a clever response. And then after queen f5, we can play knight e7 with the pin, knight takes f5, rook f5, and queen d6, b6. And after that very long line, we sort of end up in a equal endgame, really. So rook f5 was a better opportunity, but like I say, Anna Muzychuk was short of time. Must have been feeling disappointed that this queen excursion had worked out for her opponent. Queen g5, rook f8, rook to e1, rook b1, queen d3. So now black's sort of gained a dream position after what was happening earlier. She's developed all her pieces is 2 pawns up, and there's no sign of white's attack anymore, and the dangerous f pawn has disappeared. Rook f3, queen d4, rook f4. Now queen c3, hitting the loose rook. Rook e to f1, doubling up. Now the strong queen e5, sort of defending and attacking, and asking white what can she do here, but there isn't anything that white can do. Played rook f3, b5, rook to g3, queen e1, gaining time on the clock, king h2, queen e5, and now queen h6. And black's not worried about any sort of threats. Plays c4, intending to push the pawn down the board to distract white away from the king's side. Now, in desperation, Muzychuk tried knight g7, rook g7, rook g7, queen takes g7, queen takes d6. Of course, queen g7 would be hopeless as well. So now c3 with again intending just to push the pawn through. Queen d5, and now queen f7. And in this position, this is where Anna Muzychuk resigned the game. The only real, because she's a piece down, so the only real try is to sort of capture here, which at least wins the piece back. We can't take this because there's a pin on there's a pin, of course. It's illegal, in other words, on the diagonal. And if black was to play the only other try, which is this, and as Dzagnidze pointed out after the game, there's rook c8, and she showed the following line in its to the end after rook d1, rook c1, and now a5, intending just to push the pawn through down to here, distract the rook, and then win the rook by getting a new queen. So white would have to play the king across. There's no choice. And after a4, king f2, a3, king e2, a2, king d2. And now white's in time now, because if queens we can take it. But it turns out, as Dzagnidze pointed out, rook here check is a winning move. And now if takes, we can play check here, and rook takes, and we can't take the rook back because there's a new queen. And after rook d8, if you go king here or well, anywhere else actually, then rook d1 wins, because yeah, we're gonna get a queen no matter what white does. So a nice finishing touch to the game, which, like I say, Dzagnidze pointed out in the interview straight after the game. So an interesting game, not necessarily perfect, but it showed how active defense by Dzagnidze saved to the game in the end, caused Muzychuk to become short of time, and in the end she got too short of time and her attack fizzled out. So after that, the standings after that game, Dzagnidze leapfrogged over Anna Muzychuk into second place on 3. The two leaders, Goriuchkina and Harika, drew. So they were now on 3.5 out of 5. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed that game. Please subscribe or give it a like. That would be wonderful. Bye now.